Hello, this is Anjana and welcome to the first session on Ruby on Rails. This session introduces you to the Rails framework. It describes the process of evolution of frameworks and shows you how and why Rails has become one of the most popular languages in the 21st century. As a prerequisite, this tutorial assumes you have basic knowledge in object-oriented programming. Let us start by looking into what a framework is. A framework is a program, set of programs, and/or code library that writes most of your application for you. When you use a framework, your job is to write the parts of the application that make it do the specific things you want. A software framework is a reusable design and building block for a software system and/or subsystem. In an object-oriented environment, a framework consists of abstract and concrete classes. Instantiation of such a framework consists of composing and subclassing the existing classes. The software framework significantly reduced the amount of time, effort, and resources required to develop and maintain applications. Now let us see how frameworks evolved, starting with the Model 1 architecture. This is a traditional architecture. Here, the browser sends a request to a resource, in this case a JSP page. This resource handles not only the responsibility of displaying content, but also a lot of business logic. A request is made to the JSP or servlet, which in turn handles all the responsibilities for the request, including processing the request, validating data, handling business logic, and generating the response. So it ties together the presentation logic and business logic, making the code complex. This architecture was generally used in small-scale applications due to the ease of development. The Model 1 architecture evolved into the Model 2 architecture. This is a representation of the Model 2 architecture. Here you will notice the separation of business logic from presentation. It is usually associated with the model view controller paradigm. In Model 2 architecture, requests from the client browser are passed to the controller, which is a servlet. The controller performs any logic necessary to obtain the correct content for display. It then places the content in the request and decides which view it will pass the request to. The view then renders the content passed by the controller. Rendering may be as simple as printing values exposed by a data structure or beam, or it can be as complex as calling methods to obtain data from a database. Now let us move on to a web application framework. A web application framework is a reusable, skeletal, semi-complete modular platform that can be specialized to produce custom web applications, which commonly serve the web browser via the HTTP protocol. WAF usually implements the Model View Controller MVC design pattern based on the Model 2 architecture. Rails is a web application development framework written in the Ruby language. It is based on the MVC architecture we saw in the previous slides. It is designed to make programming web applications easier by making assumptions about what every developer needs to get started. It allows you to write less code while accomplishing more than many other languages and frameworks. Rails follows the following principles which make it unique in comparison to other programming languages. DRY, convention over configuration. REST. DRY, standing for don't repeat yourself, suggests that writing the same code over and over again is not good. Convention over configuration means that Rails makes assumptions about what you want to do and how you're going to do it, rather than requiring you to specify every little thing through endless configuration files. REST is the best pattern for web applications, organizing your application around resources and standard HTTP verbs. For example, to a Rails application, a request such as delete photo 17 would be understood to refer to a photo resource with an ID of 17 and to indicate a desired action deleting that resource. REST is a natural style for the architecture of web applications, and Rails hooks into this, shielding you from many of the RESTful complexities and browser quirks. Now let us see what the Model View Controller in the MVC design we saw earlier stand for. A model represents the data of an application and can also have a one-to-one relationship with the table. It holds the business logic of your application. In the case of Rails, models are primarily used for managing the rules of interaction with the corresponding database table. In most cases, each table in your database will correspond to one model in your application. The bulk of your application's business logic will be concentrated in the models. A view represents the user interface of the application. They are usually HTML files with embedded Ruby code that perform tasks related solely to the presentation of the data. Views handle the job of providing data to the web browser or other tool that is used to make requests from your application. A controller is the core of the MVC framework. It is responsible for handling the HTTP requests from the browser, interrogating the models, and passing data back to the view. This is a picturesque representation of the MVC layout. In a Rails application, incoming requests are first sent to a router. The router works out where in the application the request should be sent and how the request itself should be parsed. The router identifies a particular method called an action somewhere in the controller code. The action might look at data in the request, might interact with the model, might cause other actions to be invoked. The action prepares information for the view, which renders something to the user. The simplest way to get Ruby installed on your PC is by using the development kit from http rubyinstaller.org. The pieces you need will be Ruby, Ruby gems, the Rails gem, and a database engine. Now, what are gems? Gems are packages similar to specialized bash scripts which automate compilation and installation procedures for software packages. They contain package information along with files to install. Gems are usually built from .gemspec extension files, which are YAML files containing information on gems. However, gems may be built by Ruby code directly. Such a practice is usually used with Rake, a build tool. Ruby Gems is a package manager for the Ruby programming language that provides a standard format for distributing Ruby programs and libraries in a self-contained format called a gem, a tool designed to easily manage the installation of gems and a server for distributing them. Now let us talk a little bit about the basic components of Rails. Action Pack is a single gem that contains Action Controller, Action View, and Action Dispatch, the VC part of MVC. Action Controller is the component that manages the controllers in a Rails application. The Action Controller framework processes incoming requests to a Rails application, extracts parameters, and dispatches them to the intended action. Services provided by the Action Controller include session management, template rendering, and redirect management. Action View manages the views of your application. It can create both HTML and XML output by default. Action View manages rendering templates, including nested and partial templates, and includes built-in AJAX support. Action Dispatch handles routing of web requests and dispatches them as you want, either to your application or any other RAC application. Action Mailer is a framework for building email services. Active Record is the base for the models in a Rails application. It provides database independence, basic CRUD functionality, advanced finding capabilities, and the ability to relate models to one another among other services. An Active Resource provides a framework for managing the connection between business objects and RESTful web services. This brings us to an end of the session, summarizing what we have covered so far: Rails framework, Ruby gems, the MVC pattern, and behind the scenes look at what happens on an HTTP request. And we also look through Rails basic components. In the next session, we will delve into how to create a Rails application from scratch. Thank you for watching.